Welcome back to We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. We all know someone who manages to avoid fully committing to a relationship, either because we've dated them or someone we love has. They may say they're fully committed to you. They may even identify as being in a relationship. But there are things they do or don't do that leave you feeling like you're standing on a house of cards. They don't post pictures of you on social media. Maybe you've met some of their friends, but you haven't met all of their friends. They might have introduced you to their siblings, but not to their parents. Their behavior is consistent enough that you catch feelings, but too inconsistent to make you feel truly secure. The minute you start feeling solid in the relationship, there is a reason they become unavailable. Work gets demanding. There's a family emergency. It's like they pull away the moment real intimacy starts. Today, we're diving into the topic of commitment phobes and the people who date and love them. We're going to drill down on what creates people who can't fully lean into a committed relationship, along with the factors that create the people who are drawn to them. Here with me is my niece and co-host, Ashton Tardif.
Is the term commitment phobe an actual thing? I know it's an actual thing that's been dubbed in, modern society, but is it a real diagnosis?
It is not. We're using the term loosely to describe someone who just drags their heels when it comes to committing. And during this conversation, I'm probably going to use the word commitment phobe and avoidant person or person with an avoidant style behavioral pattern interchangeably, but it's not a real diagnosis. But I think it's appropriate to use the term because everybody knows what that means. There's few and far people for whom this topic won't land. And if I tried to describe it in a more accurate way, I would have lost the thread.
So when you say style, I just want to clarify, you mean attachment style, avoidant attachment style?
Well, I'm going to get to that. But no, actually what I mean is a style of avoiding commitments. But I will get to attachment style because it dovetails right into some of the influences that create someone who has this style of behavior in relationships.
And outside of the obvious, what are some signs that you're dating a commitment phobe?
So I want to caveat this by saying that some of these signs are normal, especially in small doses, and especially at the beginning of a relationship, and especially if not every single thing is check, check, check. All of these things describe the person I'm dating or describe me. Some of these things are normal and not concerning and appropriate for the beginning of a relationship. That said, here comes the very long list. Inconsistency is the primary pattern in someone who has an avoidant pattern of behaving in relationship, meaning they avoid committing fully. They tend to run hot and cold, or their behavior is inconsistent, and it provokes their partner to question the relationship, which in turn makes them feel overly pursued, and round and round they go. It can also feel very much like an emotional roller coaster with lots of highs and lows. The person dating that person, the commitment phobe, often feels riddled with uncertainty. There's often a discrepancy in effort. The person wanting to commit, dating the commitment phobe, often feels like they're chasing because they are. It can feel like a lack of progression in the relationship. And when progress happens, it's because the person who is dating the commitment phobe has to initiate it. And they often feel like they're in a pattern where they have to initiate every conversation that advances the relationship. There can be an avoidance of planning in the future. So an avoidance of scheduling trips together, an avoidance of discussing holidays, a reluctance to define the relationship, of course. They're likely to say things like they just don't like labels, similar to the way that people who cheat don't like rings. I mean, give me a fucking break. It's amazing how adaptive we can become when we just do the thing that's uncomfortable, and then 3 days later, we don't even notice there's a ring on our finger.
Right.
Initially, everything is uncomfortable in life. back to my list. They often don't like making plans for the future. Any trips tend to happen at the last minute. There's a lack of predictability in the relationship. Their availability fluctuates. Their level of interest can look like it changes week to week, or day to day, or month to month. They may overemphasize their need for independence, which makes it hard to create a schedule to regularly see each other. And that is one of the things that we look for, especially like, a few months into a relationship that begins to create roots of stability. They may avoid integrating you fully into their lives. They don't introduce you to the most important people in their life. They don't have a need to meet your tribe. Maybe they even avoid it if you suggest it. Holidays remain separate. There's, as I said, an avoidance of a routine. They don't really like routines. Even daily communication, like the bookending of like the morning, good morning text or call and the good night text or call, that can even rub them the wrong way. It can often provoke a power struggle when you're looking for consistency, because to them it can feel artificial and confining and rote, so not natural. They can look like they run hot and cold. They're loving and present at times and then suddenly withdrawn without clear reasons why. They have all the excuses for why they behave the way they behave. Maybe they're not over their ex, or they have past relationship wounds that need healing. Maybe they blame it on timing. It's just not the right time for them. Maybe they're uncertain about their feelings or about your character traits. They may question their attraction to you or certain aspects of how you fit into their life. Perhaps you are different in your political views or your religious views, or whether or not you want children, what your timeline is. These things can become huge hurdles to someone who is hesitant to like fully commit to a relationship.
Mhm.
And then general concerns about compatibility that they're not really able to articulate and that you can't really change. So those are the top hits on avoidant traits.
And I have to say, I don't have a single friend or even person that I know who hasn't come in contact with someone like this or been in a situation, myself included. I've been on both sides. But before we get into that, what causes someone to become avoidant or commitment phobic?
So I'm just going to give you big general categories because lots of things can contribute to it. But big picture, generally speaking, we're talking about two categories. The first is family history. So it's one of the strongest influences in how we're going to show up in relationships, because our families or our primary caregivers are the ones who teach us how to love and how to be loved, how to coexist and how to be accepted in relationships. So those early childhood experiences, they set a template for how we behave in our adult relationships. If we got our needs met consistently enough as young kids, we will emerge from childhood with what is called a secure attachment style.
Yeah.
Extra credit for you, Ashton, for
Yeah.
flagging that
The
early on.
elusive secure attachment style that I've been waiting to hear someone grow up with.
If we didn't get our needs met consistently as children, we will emerge with an insecure attachment style, of which there are three, but the one that usually results in someone being avoidant is called the avoidant attachment style. I don't want to get into the weeds about attachment style because next week we've got the OG of theorists as our guest, who's going to explain them and drill down on them at a molecular level and in a much more eloquent way than I can. But again, big picture, people with an avoidant attachment style were kids who had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, or they were insensitive, or they had negative responses to the children's need for connection. And by that, I mean they were emotionally overwhelmed by their children's needs, or they responded by expressing their overwhelm. So you're an infant or a little child, and rather than remaining in a holding pattern of wanting or needing indefinitely or risking that they alienate their caregiver, They adapted to their caregiver's limited capacities to meet their needs by shutting their own needs off. It's actually really, really sad and also quite adaptive because, you know, think about how much better a fit that makes a kid. If a parent has a limited capacity for attachment, connection, and caregiving, the child who senses that shuts down their needs, but then as adults, they often struggle to know what their own needs are and to meet the needs of their partners. They don't have a frame of reference for it themselves. These are people who are very, very independent. They're self-reliant. They can't understand why others turn to each other for things that they can easily do for themselves. These people, as adults, avoidant attachment styled adults, can easily feel suffocated in relationships. The second category that helps to create someone who's a commitment phobe or avoidant of commitment is past relationship wounds. I sound like Dr. Obvious here, but I'm just going to check the box. It can also cause someone to be very slow at committing. And if you think about it, it's quite logical. If your last relationship wounded you deeply and you're not very resilient, and then you didn't work on healing yourself when you didn't bounce back, you're not going to be super quick to jump into your next relationship. So those are the two primary causes of somebody who avoids commitments.
Which makes sense to me. But let's flip the script on the other side. So what causes someone to date or be attracted to people who avoid commitments? Because that, I feel like that's a whole different level of wounding and attachment style.
And it is. It absolutely is. So before I get into like the deep clinical stuff, let me just start with everybody likes a little bit of a challenge. Okay? And like the least pathological explanation for this is that we all generally like someone who is interested in us, but has a full life and is independent and is confident and is secure and is available enough for us, but not so much that they look like they need us or that we're plugging a hole in their life. That's not something that we find universally attractive. When we survey large populations, slight inconsistency in availability is very attractive to people. And early on in a relationship, everybody's pacing themselves. So it's easy to chalk up what could be an avoidant attachment style early on to like the person's just pacing themselves. It's really hard to discern. Remember, it's only over time that we might notice that someone is really slow to commit or having trouble committing. So for some people, it's a challenge. They want to see if they can actually change the person. Can they be the reason why the person's priorities shift? That's super gratifying. But the thing is, change is so hard. And even if a person wants to change, very few of us change for our partners.
And arguably, they probably shouldn't.
Well, I don't know. An avoidant attachment style leaves somebody really, really a poor fit to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, I know.
So the path forward for them is not going to be an easy one. The other thing that will cause somebody to be in a relationship with someone who's avoidant or a commitment phobe is their own attachment style. So by far the people who are most attracted to avoidant partners, most willing to hang in there past the point of like, okay, it's not a pacing thing. We're not super new. The people who are willing to hang in there many months and years tend to be people with an anxious attachment style. And people who have an anxious attachment style are people who came out of childhood with parenting experiences who tended to be inconsistent or who gave them love and care in unpredictable ways. They basically had to fuss to get their needs met. If they were quiet and they waited, sometimes they'd get their needs met and sometimes they wouldn't. So they learned that people are sometimes unreliable and that they need to stay vigilant about getting their needs met. You can see how that becomes an anxious trait as an adult.
Yeah.
So as an adult, the way they calm themselves when they're dysregulated, especially with their partner, is in the presence of the partner. They seek out proximity to the partner to calm themselves. They tend to want to be people who want to talk through things quickly. They're not people who tend to go off and need time alone to calm themselves. They rely on others to do that for and with them. So maybe you're thinking, like, why would someone who has a history of not getting their needs met as a child turn to a partner as an adult who isn't likely to meet their needs? Well,
Wow.
the people we date don't broadcast their attachment styles. Most people don't even know what an attachment style is, let alone what theirs is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not super obvious early on. By the time we realize it, we've got a lot of skin in the game, and we know through the research that the longer we've been in a relationship with each other, the less likely we are to break up.
That, and like, I think there's also something to be said for we're comfortable with what we know. So if you're used to receiving, love and affection in that scattered way, I think we unintentionally seek it out and it's familiar, speaking from experience, which is sad, but
It
it's
is
something
sad.
that we can absolutely heal and work through. Is there something that the partner dating the commitment phobe unintentionally does to provoke avoided behaviors? And I think you minorly touched on it a bit in your last answer, but to get a bit more granular, is there something specific outside being maybe quote unquote needy?
So it can be exacerbated when the avoidant partner is dating a partner who's anxiously attached. But that's also a double bind because the commitment phobe or avoidant partner's behaviors literally would provoke an anxious attachment style in anyone that they dated. Those
Mm-hmm.
behaviors do not promote a secure attachment style. So when you're insecure, you're going to pursue. And the less space you give the anxiously attached or the avoidant person, the less space that you give them, the more likely they are to feel smothered, the more likely they are to feel like they can't breathe. But it becomes a co-created pattern where the commitment phobe is doing things unconsciously, usually, that is promoting insecurity in their partner, which provokes the partner to come closer to them. And the thing that they like is a little space in between the two of you. And there's ways of making this work if both partners aren't triggering the hell out of each other. But because the one tends to date the other, it becomes a recipe for a mess. There are
Mm-hmm.
things that do make it worse, like looking for commitment too soon, requesting validation or reassurance a lot. People who are avoidant or commitment phobe will often tell me when they're my clients, it's like my partner is has a nervous system made of Teflon. I reassure them, and it's like 10 minutes later they want the same information again and again and again. It feels
Mm-hmm.
like there's nothing on their nervous system for the information to stick to.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, sorry, not to interject. My follow-up question was going to be, when is there a limit to knowing if you're asking for validation too much or if you're being fair and not getting your needs met? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of women especially struggle with asking for validation and trying not to be needy.
So that's just it. You need clarity about your relationship status, or you're going to be seeking other ways for feeling reassured. And again, it's a co creation. If the avoidant person is avoiding the label of being in a relationship, then they're setting up their partner to feel insecure and to seek out reassurance in other ways. Is there a way of knowing? Yeah, like if you just moved in with your partner 3 months ago and you're hoping for your partner to let you know whether or not it's going to advance to the next level, that's too soon.
Oh,
You
yeah,
just moved
yeah.
in. You just moved in. If you just got the label of girlfriend, I wouldn't be planning the next holiday in the next 2 or 3 months, even if it is in the next 2 or 3 months. I would give your partner some space. I would give them some space. You want the person to feel like, as the commitment phobe, you want that person to feel like they're getting rewarded as they reach the next milestone of the relationship intensity. But what they can often feel like is like every time they give you an inch, you're asking for more, you're asking for more, you're asking for more. You got to let the person sit in the status that they're in if they're stretching and giving you more for a minute.
Even at the quote unquote expense of your own needs, or is it your responsibility if you're feeling that way to find other healthy avenues to fulfill that kind of need of validation?
I think that you have to look for other ways to get that need met. Your partner can't meet everything, but let me just go back to the list. So, trying to change your partner, nobody wants to feel like they're a fixer-upper or somebody's project. So, trying to fix your partner can really be upsetting to them and provoke a power struggle between you and the avoidant person. Not respecting their boundaries is another piece.
How does dating a commitment phobe affect the partner outside of maybe needing more validation?
People who date commitment phobes or avoidant partners often feel tortured. Partner generally blames themselves for the lack of progress in the relationship. They tend to feel less than, not good enough. They feel so insecure, like they are on an emotional roller coaster. They're often filled with uncertainty or doubt. They're often filled with confusion, particularly if their partner is a flip-flopper, if there's someone who is, in the relationship and then abruptly ends the relationship and then says they had second thoughts, they can't live without the partner. They have trouble trusting. They feel anxious. They have an increased fear of abandonment, and they can feel emotionally exhausted, as I'm sure you can imagine.
I've been there. I've definitely been there, and it's not fun. And like you said, it does feel like you're being tortured, and it's ultimately really unhealthy if you can't identify the pattern and find ways to like divert your thinking. It's exhausting. So here's a fun question. Have you ever been in a relationship with a commitment phobe or someone who was avoidant?
I have, yes. So my last spouse was someone who I found to be quite avoidant. Well, you were only 7 when we split up, so you were just a baby. So it makes sense
Not
that you
quite
wouldn't
as
have tracked
perceptive.
that. Well, you're not, yeah, maybe you didn't track that. But when we first met, we were just friends, and he was super available. And then the moment it turned romantic, he became very busy and very unavailable. There was always a reason, like we were super young, we were like focused on college, then grad school, and him law school, and like both of our careers, and that made a lot of sense for a really long time. But then years turned into over a decade, and by the time he was ready to prioritize me, to be honest, I had built a very fulfilling life without him. Um, Most of what I accomplished by my early 30s was out of pure boredom. Like the company that I run today, I formed that company when I was 28 years old, and that was a project to keep me occupied. Then I got my PhD because I wasn't busy enough. And then we started running restaurants. But it was all a distraction. I was literally just plugging up pieces of my heart that weren't being fulfilled. And like I said, by the time he was fully ready to lean into the relationship, 13 years later, I was good. I liked the life that we had set up. I was very career oriented at that point. He wanted me to like not work. Hey, you can relax. You can like, I know, right? Can you imagine?
I'm like, hello?
And I
Hello?
was like,
Where
no,
do-
thank you. I was like, no, thank you. I can't even imagine saying that today. What? I don't have to work? Done. Kidding. But I couldn't maintain that. But the point is, going back then, I was like 34 years old. I was not, I wasn't down with that. I had a very fulfilling life. I had great friendships, and I didn't want to change things. So it ended. And I suppose that there's maybe a cautionary tale there for avoidance. Like perhaps by the time you're ready for real intimacy, your partner may have learned a thing or two from you and may not be, in a holding pattern anymore for something that you didn't give them for so long.
I think that a lot of good things based on that story obviously came out of that. So perhaps it's necessary for some people to date an avoidant attachment person or a commitment phobe because it forces you to realize there's more outside of relationships and discover things about yourself, like truly.
But it was
Um,
never anything I really wanted, to be honest with you. What I
well, who wants
wanted,
that?
yeah, what I wanted early on was a very simple life. I did not want the complexities of the strappings that my current life requires of me. But I'm also super fulfilled, and I
Hmm.
wouldn't, I don't want to change things. Like
Right.
there are, the people I've helped over the years, like I had no desire to make a big contribution to the world. And
Yeah. Well, look at you
o-
now.
obviously that's not the path that was meant for me.
Everything happens for a reason.
You're
S-
welcome.
Shout out to your ex-husband. Um, so I want to talk about something that a lot of people find themselves faced with when they're dating a commitment phobe. And I guess you could call it an ultimatum, but you reach a point where you have to look, if it's been an appropriate amount of time, and say, hey, shit or get off the pot, basically. So I feel like ultimatums get a bad rap. And I feel like I know how your perception and how you feel about them. But how do ultimatums work with a commitment phobe? And I also want to caveat here and ask when it comes to a commitment phobe and ultimatums, is there a difference between setting a personal boundary and setting an ultimatum? And
So good.
can they be the same thing?
Like, what is the difference between an ultimatum and a boundary? That's a
Mm,
great, great question. And I often find myself when I'm working with a client who is dating someone who's dragging their heels in a relationship, I'm usually working with the partner. And the partner has some real clear reasons for why they're dragging their heels. And they're reporting to me that they're telling their partner, I need to see these changes. And the partner is not making those changes or is resisting making those changes. And also objecting to how slowly the relationship is advancing. But the reason the relationship is there's drag on the momentum is because the partner, my client, is not seeing the changes that they've asked for. And what I say to my clients is, they because they often feel very guilty. They're like, oh, my partner is like investing all this time. And I'm like, your partner has control over their own lives. They can decide that it's too long,
mhm.
that they're of an age where they want to procreate and that they're not going to do this anymore. You're not the only person who's got power here.
Right.
So my answer about boundaries is yes, yes, and yes. We need to have boundaries. We need to know how long we're going to be willing to wait for certain milestones, and especially if our partner can't explain to us why they're not willing to make the commitments that we're looking for, especially then we need to know in our
Mhm.
head a time frame. And I don't think it's fucked up at all. I think it's completely reasonable to tell your partner, okay, I'm cool to give this another year. Do it. Do it. I don't think that's an ultimatum. I think that's a boundary.
Mhm.
Ultimatums are tricky. They usually trigger one of two responses. It either pushes the avoidant person over the edge, giving them the out that they've been yearning for and didn't have like the external trigger to feel confident or comfortable in ending the relationship, but that gives it to them. Or it can also trigger some short term compliance, which is usually not sustainable. They might agree to it initially because logically they understand that their partner has been in a holding pattern for a long time and they want to do right by them, but their emotional need for independence is likely to rear its head and then they will blow it up again. And it usually triggers the emotional roller coaster that people describe they experience when they're dating an avoidant.
So let's amp it up a level. What happens when you marry a commitment phobe? Can they actually change once you've made that like ultimate commitment, or does it just progress to different other big life commitments like children, a home?
If positive change happens, it is usually because the partner of the commitment phobe becomes more secure once they're married, and
Mm,
that partner stops provoking the pursuit avoidance pattern that we see. So the more secure the partner is, the less likely that partner is to engage in that list of behaviors that I rattled off that avoidants find triggering. That calms everything down. It gives the avoidant or the commitment phobe more space to come closer to the partner. So one of the things that we want is we want space. We want to give the avoidant person some space so that they can pursue, so that they can initiate, so that they can lean in. If the anxious partner is the one who's doing all the forward thinking, all the planning, all the future thinking, then there's no need for the other one to think through that. Like, for example, if I'm out with you and Steph, there are two things I don't have to worry about: time and threats to my being. Steph is going to cover every threat to our personhood imaginable because my wife, she sees around two corners, not one. And I also don't have to worry about time because you're so neurotic around time that I know I'm going to be everywhere I need to be. I can really relax with the two of
I'm
you.
so happy that I can
I know
provide that for you.
you bring this to me. So, but if I'm alone at the beach, I actually have to pay attention when I go into the water because I don't have Steph there. If I also have to pay attention to what time I leave the beach because Steph's not there to be like, hey, we have to eat, you know? So there's a co-creation that develops with any people who are in relationships. The strengths of one provokes a weakness in another. So if the anxious person is constantly pushing for the next milestone, the next level of commitment, the next thing, then the avoidant person never has to be thinking about the future. But if in a marriage, the person who is in the relationship with the historically avoidant person calms down, which often happens with marriage, then the commitment phobe will often, things really calm down. That can really calm things down. Can is the disclaimer there. But generally speaking, a leopard doesn't change their spots. Is that the expression? And if you're avoidant in a long-term committed relationship before marriage, you're likely to be avoidant beyond that, which is why we should all be in our own therapy, healing our own wounds so that we do not marry people who are going to wound us the way we were wounded in childhood, because that is exactly what happens.
Okay, so let's say that I'm a commitment phobe, which honestly, I'm sure I have been at certain points in my life. What are some strategies for managing that or overcoming that?
Okay. Assuming the person who is a commitment phobe has an avoidant attachment style. And again, I'm going to actually link to an attachment style quiz in our show notes so that everybody can check their attachment style and see where they land. And if you're confused about your results, if you want to screenshot your results, especially the 4-part quadrant that it's going to give you, and email it to me, I'll put my email in the show notes and you can take the quiz and email it to me. And I'm happy to tell you what it means because it can be a little tricky to understand. But assuming that the person who's a commitment phobe has an avoidant attachment style, these types of people tend to be very stoic in how they present. They present as very competent, very emotionally contained. They lean on logic, and they tend to not be very emotionally attuned to themselves or to others because recall how the person was created. If they have an avoidant attachment style, they shut their own needs down as children to be able to coexist with their caregivers. So they're not attuned to how they're feeling in any given moment or how others are feeling in any given moment. And they're also not very good at expressing those things or containing that in another person. So the primary goal is to increase their capacity for attunement. Attunement means understanding intuitively the person that they're with and being in rhythm with them.
Mhm.
And you can do this a few ways. How do you increase your capacity for attunement? You start by increasing your ability to express affect, so emotional expression. And you start by expanding your emotional vocabulary so that you can describe emotions beyond the 4 or 5 that a toddler knows how to label. Like, and I don't mean that to be condescending, but it kind
No,
of is.
it's hungry, tired.
Happy, happy, mad, sad, fine, or scared. Those are the primary emotions. And we want people to have access to more nuanced language to describe their emotions. And there's an app that's actually developed by Yale University that I will link to in the show notes that I love to give my clients. Once you sign up for this app, it's going to hit you up 2 or 3 times a day and say, "How are you feeling?" And it's going to give
Oh,
you
you
an
made me
emotions
download
wheel.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and look where we are now. Look at
Well,
how emotionally intelligent we are now.
we
How
are.
defensive do
I
I
wouldn't
sound?
credit the app, but I tried it. But yeah, no, I think it's a great tool for people who are great at consistency with things like that. I'm unfortunately not, but
It's actually great for people who are not consistent with things because it is giving you the alerts. So it's not like you have to reference a workbook 2 or 3 times a day and remember to do that.
yeah.
It's going to initiate that, and it is an evidence-based tool and, put out there by Yale University. Doesn't get better credential than that, and I will link to that in the show notes. But what happens when you use that app is that you begin to learn new words to use to describe your feelings. So, maybe you're not necessarily happy, but you're also not feeling negative and you're just feeling content. It's a nice nuanced word to use when somebody says, "How are you doing?" And you say, "I'm content." You know, I
I'm gonna say that.
I feel
Someone
content
asked
right now. My current emotional state is one of
you.
contentment. Um, you want to be able to use more nuanced language when it comes to describing your feelings. First of all, it is if you're any partner that an avoidant person is dating needs that. They need more information than you're likely giving them.
Mhm.
So give them more nuanced feedback like that. The next thing to do to begin healing an avoidant attachment style is to build increase your ability to receive compassion and nurturing. So remember, these are people who, as children, they shut that down so that they wouldn't need it. So now you're an adult, and it turns out you can't be in a loving relationship unless you're in a relationship with another avoidant. And then one of you usually
Huh.
turns more anxious. One of them cancels the other out.
Mm.
They can't both be super avoidant.
Sounds like a great time.
And so and it's quite interesting to watch, like person
I'm sure.
who has never had a history of avoidant of anxiety in relationships is suddenly like, what the actual fuck? Like, I don't know where I stand in this relationship. I feel
Hmm.
suddenly needy. Right. A real avoidant attachment style can leave even another avoidant feeling uncertain and insecure and needy. It's a terrible pattern to be in. So, back to the avoidant, what to do to heal it. We need to increase your ability to receive compassion and nurturing. So, when your partner is giving you a compliment or is validating a tough moment for you, practice maintaining eye contact during those moments. Practice not deflecting. Do not deflect or minimize or rupture those moments by like needing to go to the bathroom or needing to check your phone or checking the alert that just buzzed on your phone. Human beings have, especially the smarter you are, the better your excuses for exiting intimacy become. So I'm not saying that all of these explanations are not legitimate for needing to run to the other room or look at your phone. You're in the middle of like closing something big, maybe on a house or something. But in those intimate moments, your stretch is to sit and tolerate it and wait 30 seconds and receive it. And don't minimize it. Don't be like, well, I didn't do it that well.
Like
Um,
self-deprecated away.
yeah, the way I do it.
The
And
way I say, we do it.
we do it. We do it all the time, you
Yeah,
and
we
I.
do.
We're like, oh, come on. I mean, unless it's like my makeup's pretty. And then I'm like, I'm here for that.
We're like,
Tell
yeah,
me
I
more.
know. I worked really hard.
Yeah, this is the third time I put my lashes on, and that's why they're good. Um, you have to increase your ability to provide compassion and nurturing as well. So hold yourself accountable once a week for showing up emotionally for your partner and being really present. Just really ask yourself at the end of every week, pick a day, maybe it's Sunday, look back on the 6 days, the prior 6 days, and ask yourself, did I show up at least once really, really emotionally available? And did my partner feel that from me? If not, make it happen that night. Make it
Mhm.
happen that night. Maybe you can prompt it by giving your partner something that you appreciated about them. You know, I really appreciated it, Ashton, when you took the time to XYZ. That can go a long way, and then be there for the person while they're receiving that from you.
Mhm.
So again, beginning with a small capacity for this and building it over time, we want to raise your capacity to tolerate compassion that you're receiving and to give compassion and to be there emotionally for your partner. And then practicing mirroring other people's body language, affect, and tone. What's interesting is that, and I started this answer by saying, people who have an avoidant attachment style, they tend to present as very stoic. And that can sometimes mean that they speak in a very contained, concise tone, also known as sounding robotic.
Mm.
Human beings are hardwired to understand that tone as danger. We associate that tone with a school principal, with an angry boss, with a stern parent, with being in
Siri.
trouble, with Siri. So no matter how limited your vocal range is, there's room in it for melody. We know this because anytime we see a kitten or a puppy or a little baby, intuitively we all use hi, like a more melodic voice with a baby, a kitten, or a puppy. And that is what we want. We want the avoidant to begin to mirror the person's affect that they're with. So right now you're nodding your head. So I would be nodding my head to let you know I'm attuned with you, to
Mhm.
let you know that I'm with you here. And I would be matching your tone if you were telling me a story about something distressing that happened to you. Wow, that sounds really serious. Just
Right.
mirroring the other person's body language, because that is going to communicate to them that you're fully with them, and it's teaching you appropriate body language and emotional affect, which we all need in relationships, the healthy ones.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I just never thought about it as mirroring. I just thought about it as having compassion. But I guess that's not as textbook for everybody as it is for some.
I'm using the word mirroring in a way that you're unfamiliar with. I've historically used the word mirroring to describe a communication skill where you
Hmm.
paraphrase what the other person's saying. Here I'm using it loosely to describe body language, tonality, and cadence. And for the person who has an avoidant attachment style, they don't know how to, because they learned to really soothe in isolation. That's the other component to the avoidant attachment style person. Like, they learned to
Isolation.
soothe themselves. Yes, they do not do it in the company of others.
Yeah. And running away. I learned from dating an avoidant. Anytime there was conflict or a fight, no matter, and I'm not a yeller, they want to leave. They want to go. They need to flee. And that was like the worst possible thing that could happen to me as a then anxious attachment style. Um,
Meaning you would then yell? Like, what do you
no,
mean?
I would then be like, please don't leave. Why are you leaving? We need to sit here and talk about this. We need to work it out. Like, why are you running away? That's the worst possible thing that you could do to me right now, which only made him want to go more, but with a tinge of guilt, if anything.
But that sucks, I'm going to say, in
No,
your
it
defense.
sucked. It
It
did suck.
totally sucks. Because what I landed on was that you had the ability to describe, like, this is the worst thing you could do to me when I'm dysregulated. When we're in a fight, you leaving just amplifies my escalation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is such a gift to be able to give a partner, to be able to tell the partner, give the partner an owner's manual on how I operate. Here is how I operate. That is going to make things worse. If you sit here and talk to me, things will get better. That is a gift.
Yeah, I just realized that this podcast, at least the episodes I'm on, is basically a user manual to date me or understand me emotionally. So this should be required listening for anyone who wants to marry me in the future.
You're such a pisser.
Oh God, what can I say? See, I just did it again. I just did it. We talked about it. Can't take a compliment. But what do you say to that?
I say read us out.
We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling as a Sterling Standard production. Editing and sound engineering by Bart Miguel. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani, Preston Smith, and Stephanie Sterling. If you're dating someone you think is a commitment phobe, feel free to share this episode with them. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you'll come to expect. References are always linked in the show notes.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.